Light Pollution News, June 2025, Cozy Lychnology. We finish out our stellar June lineup by exploring our ancient relationship with the night. We always knew that chocolate at night was a good thing, but dang, the Mayans took it to a whole new level. Can the stars heal the mind? A new dark sky trail, and much more. This month, I welcome back Editor-in-Chief of one of my favorite magazines, Astronomy Magazine, David Eicher, the host of the Restoring Darkness podcast, Mr. Michael Colligan, and a Professor of Anthropology from Bellevue College, Dr. Nancy Gonlin. All this with some great conversation coming your way right now. It's time for Light Pollution News. I'm your host, Bill McGeaney. Each episode, we gather the news together and bring on three great guests to talk about what's going on. If you're at home or listening for the first time, welcome. We publish this show twice a month, diving into topics around nighttime preservation in our highly dynamic societies. I like to think of Light Pollution News as a kitchen table conversation. It's more than just reporting on the news. We have great personalities and great insights derived from the community of guests we regularly bring on. As usual, let me do the quick spiel before we get going. First, if you're curious about anything here today, just jump over to our show notes. Our website has a detailed listing of all of today's article links. We have a summary on there. We have read-alongs. We have everything that helps package it up for you, the listener. Also, check out our 2024 Ecology Wrap-Up, which shows you the biggest stories from last year. I know it's a little bit late, but it's packaged nicely for you, the listener, to actually be able to share and concisely use snippets and whatnot to package up the details from last year's ecology news of how artificial light actually impacts our environment. You can package that up and share it with whomever you may wish to share it with, and it helps educate others. And that's a hope that Ecology Wrap-Up can do. Now, we also love listener mail. Feel free to reach out, ask questions, share comments, or otherwise connect with us. You can find all of those in the show notes via whatever podcast player you're listening to right now. You can text us. You can find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, Facebook, or you can just email me, bill@lightpollutionnews.com. Finally, if you've ever asked why we don't have video, it's because of this. We have a good chunk of cost and effort that go into bringing you the show twice a month. Some of that is covered by our gracious listeners, but we still have many gaps we're looking to fill. Cost involves show production. That's largely me, including research and show builds. Show engineering. That's our man, Caden, and our robust social media program. That's my wife, Caitlin. We just don't have the resources at the moment to fully commit the video, but would love to get there. So if you like what we're doing, why not consider becoming a supporter? You can learn more about the benefits of being a supporter via today's show notes. Cost is very low. It starts at $3 a month, which makes it one of the cheapest ways to continue to expand awareness and communication around the topic of a sustainable night. If you're able to and you find the show valuable, why not support the show? And for you, the listener who already supports Light Pollution News, thank you so much. Your assistance really does help us pay down our fixed costs and helps us continue to do what we do. So thank you once more. I'm very glad to have you at home joining me today. So welcome back. Three really great guests here. First up, we have podcaster and host of Get a Grip podcast and the Restoring Darkness podcast. He's an entrepreneur with his hands in multiple lighting companies and disposal management businesses. I'd like to welcome back Michael Colligan. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bill. It's been fun so far. Let's do the second one.
Next up, he's the editor-in-chief of Astronomy and author of 26 books on science and history. And I want to welcome back Mr. David Eicher. Welcome back to the show. David, many people may not know this. Maybe they do. I think maybe I'll get some rolling eyes from some of the listeners today on this, but because I came across something from Reflections a long time ago, the Astronomical League's Reflections, whereby you had a band. And you're a lifelong drummer, right? Are you still out there playing?
I'm still a drummer. I haven't played really since I've moved just last year to Tucson, being liberated from Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a great place. You know, cheese, beer, bowling, not so much for observational astronomy. So we have a new owner, can be anywhere now. So this is the place to be to observe the night sky. I really have not played since I've been out here for the better part of a year. But one of my pals who I've written books about is Brian May, who's an astronomer, and he happens to play guitar for a group called Queen. So I feel close to rock and roll knowing him and all of his pals.
Have you ever had a chance to just drum for him?
I've never jammed with him, but I've written 2 books with Brian, and it's a long story. Again, I don't want to detour things, but there's a science festival that he's involved with that we put on, and we have quite a number of people. Rick Wakeman and Peter Gabriel is on our board, and Brian Eno and others. So astronomy and the sciences, it does attract a lot of musicians are into this stuff with the other halves of their brain, if you will.
Yeah, that's a pretty intimidating lineup too.
Great, the nicest guys in the world, really.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's funny the music and astronomy go together. I've heard that my whole life. It's something that I think is pretty true. And then lastly, we have someone who I'm very glad to have with us, and as Dr. Nancy Gonlin. Dr. Gonlin is Professor of Anthropology at Bellevue College, and Dr. Gonlin has a PhD in Mesoamerica archaeology. Dr. Gonlin, you also pioneered this discipline of the archaeology of the night. So welcome back to the show. And how hard is it to study the night? Is there a daytime bias in how we perceive our history?
Well, thank you for having me again. I appreciate it. And yes, there is a bias. It's called daycentrism.
Wow. Got a fancy name for that even.
Of course we do. I'm an academic. Of course I have all of these fancy names. I already taught you one in the last episode, Lychnology. We are a diurnal species. So if you want to study the night, that means you have to stay alert from dusk to dawn while maintaining keen observations and participating in nightlife. So while the inquiry into ancient nights does not have that constraint, it presents its own hurdles, since our objects of interest are lie buried in the past and literally in the dark in the ground.
Yeah, when I was doing the workup for this episode, I watched a number of your TED Talks, and I'm really curious about this story. You spoke about the role of chocolate and night in ancient Mayan societies. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about this? I feel like these are 2 things that I enjoy very much. I'm sure many of you enjoy that as well. I didn't know that they were linked. Why don't you tell us the story?
Yeah, cacao was domesticated in South America and then likely spread to Mexico and also Central America, part of which is Mesoamerica, a cultural area. And people consumed chocolate for thousands of years. We think of this as something new, but they did not consume it the way that we did. And we know that chocolate is a stimulant. It contains theobroma. Theobroma cacao is the genus and species name, and theobromine is the stimulant that chocolate contains. So chocolate became an exclusive item in classic Maya society, which existed from 250 to about 900 of the Common Era, or AD. And chocolate was used in hosting political parties for kings and queens. So the way it would be made is that you would grind the chocolate on a grinding stone, the mano and metate, and make it into a powder and combine it with other kinds of liquids. And you would sometimes mix it with maize or corn, and you would pour it from a great height so that it would froth. This is the original request when you go to Starbucks, an extra foam, please. Yes, because this foaming action was thought to be an act of the gods, that they were present, and these bubbles popping meant something. So cacao came to be associated with an elite lifestyle. It came to be associated with power. Cacao is a tricky plant to grow. It doesn't like great variance in temperature. So it was an exclusive kind of product, and you would consume this at night. And if you really wanted to impress your political guests, you would serve them hot, foaming cacao that was slightly fermented. So that is recorded on a scene from a site called Piedras Negras in Guatemala in the AD 600s. And you have a scene there of the king entertaining some of his recent political allies who were former enemies, and he's serving chocolate.
That's an amazing story. And you say it's slightly fermented, so they're getting a stimulant and a little bit of a buzz, I'm assuming is what's going on.
Yeah.
All right. Well, sounds like a great night to me. Okay.
I think so too. The closest I think we can get is to buy some Godiva chocolate liqueur.
There you go. Yep.
I only say this because my father was a professor of organic chemistry. Theobromine, is a psychoactive drug that's in chocolate that's a very weak relative of cocaine, So going out in the dark fearlessly, observing the night sky after you eat a little bit of chocolate will make it even just a little bit more interesting than without the chocolate.
Yes. Have some more.
Yes.
They knew how to throw parties. All right. Give it to the Mayans, right? We're having some fun here, so why not just continue it? This caught my eye. It was a recap clip from the NHL podcast Unscripted, whereby hosts Adnan Verk and Jason Demers chatted with Capitals player Dylan Strom. And while much of the conversation revolved around Alexander Ovechkin's big record-breaking goal, which broke Wayne Gretzky's career goal record of 894 this past spring. In the interview, there was a clubhouse discussion that eventually circled over to Capitals defensive player Jacob Churchran, who appears to have ditched standard household lighting to bring on beeswax candles as a way to get around the house. I thought this would make a good segue in the conversation for today. So should we be lighting our houses by candlelight? Or is anyone going to step up and champion this new trend?
No, don't do it. Because candles pollute indoor atmosphere. So you might not necessarily want to breathe in the smoke from that, beeswax or not. Okay. And then also, one of the major hazards for people in the past before safe electric lighting was the danger of fire, of your house burning down. So I would hate that to happen to Jacob Chitron. Okay.
Michael, it's a solution, right? It's a solution to your LED problem, I think.
No, I think I agree with Dr. Gonlin, the anthropologist, that I think there's times when we want to create some intimacy, as you said in the last show, where you have a nice dinner, you light some candles, but to use candles for general purpose lighting is, I think, to go in the wrong direction. I think there's lots of incandescent lights that you can buy if you're really very sensitive to LEDs and you don't like LEDs at all. Incandescent is a burning filament, just like a candle. So there is combustion happening inside of an incandescent bulb. And it's emitting IR energy, infrared energy, just like a candle or a fire would emit. So if you're concerned about those other features of that candles provide, incandescent lights still provide those for you, and they're far more energy efficient and safe electric lighting, as Dr. Gonlin said. So no, I don't support that Capitals player. I think he's a young man who's not married, without kids, who's joking around, I think, on the show. Or maybe they're just going full, whatever, back to nature, whatever, but that's not a solution for, 350 million people in the United States or 40 million in Canada. That's not a solution.
All right. Well, shucks. Okay. Well, Nancy, I want to revisit an article that brought you into my view, and that was this piece about 6 months ago from Atlas Obscura, whereby you and your colleague, April Noel, looked at an aspect of early human life, right, that many of us take for granted, and that's essentially how people experience night, how they engage with night. What drove you down this topic of the ancient nightlife?
It was alcohol.
Well,
I said at the beginning of the last program that there I was drinking some wine. It would not be the first time that scientific breakthroughs were made induced by some kind of stimulant or whatever you want to call it. Okay. So there I was drinking wine and thinking about the night and realized there was nothing in archaeology about the night. And I contacted April and she said, let's do it. Let's just go all out. And we invited hundreds of archaeologists to participate in our symposia. And some of them said, you're nuts. This isn't going to work. There's nothing about the night. You can't tell anything about the night, but you can. If you think of your own nocturnal footprint and what you do at night and how you use your house in different spaces, as an archaeologist, I make the assumption that behavior and beliefs can be transferred into the material record, that we leave a record of these kinds of activities and values and beliefs. So if you think about religion, what kind of evidence do we have about religion? Well, there are churches and temples and synagogues, okay? So there is evidence for non-material things. And if you think of the night, it's normal process of the earth and that everything experiences the night. So we use art history, we use epigraphy, that is ancient writing, we use ethnohistory and ethnography to flesh out some of the details. And then this falls under the general umbrella of the anthropology of the night. And this comes from a French school of thought, especially Jacques Galinier in Paris. He pioneered the anthropology of the night, which is looking at mostly cultural practices of the night, modern day times. So we went that route and invited some like-minded crazy archaeologists. And here we are today with 3 edited volumes later.
So a lot of the work is being done based on, I guess, art. I guess, like, how do you ascertain how people engage with that night? What is it?
Yeah, what the hell am I talking about? Well, if you think about artifacts, what kind of artifacts do you use at night in the modern world? I use a wine glass at night. I typically do not drink before happy hour, say. I use lights at night. We have separate bedrooms that we typically use more at night than during the day. So all of these are material items that leave a mark in the archaeological record. And say, for example, the classic Maya, going back to them, they built stone benches in their houses, and then they would make them much more comfortable with some cotton padding, for example, or kapok, and weavings of material that they would use. They had their own kinds of lights that they used in terms of pottery vessels. They had hearths, they had torches. Some of this is pictured on pottery vessels from that era. There's something called the Maya Vase Database by Justin and Barbara Kerr that has hundreds of different kinds of painted pottery from this era. And you can look there. We know ethnographically, the study of modern peoples, that there are certain cues to the night that people might use. We have evidence going further back in time, like tobacco, for example, was a substance that was used by the classic Maya, particularly at night, along with cacao. So when we see a painted vessel that has a scene of a king sitting on his throne and his attendants are smoking and someone's holding a torch, we can say that that probably happened at night. Now, granted, that's a representation. That doesn't mean there's a one-to-one correlation of an exact event. Mm-hmm. But there are also hieroglyphs from the classic Maya that tell us about the night as well. So there's lots of evidence. And I told the authors of my various co-edited volumes that you already have the data. You just have to think about it in a different way. I hope that answers your question.
It does.
Bill.
It does. No, it totally does. I think because my question on that is, like, so for thousands of years, people create stuff, junk, whatever it is, like the leftover stuff. And we have a collection of this stuff, but we've always interpreted it through, is it daytime only? Is that correct? Yeah, I see you're nodding your head.
Yes. Yeah, that's not an understatement. And I'm not the one who came up with that term of day centrism. British archaeologist Hilary Orange came up with that term. And we automatically default to the day because if we have an artifact, like, say, my coffee mug, we don't think about whether it was used during the day. We just assume that it was. That's our default. It's like lighting at night. We don't think about it. We just have it. It's just there. We don't have to think about it because we just hit a switch. In the past, lighting was very expensive, whether you're talking about beeswax candles,
which you're not going to light your house up with, right?
Oh.
We're not doing it. Okay. Got it.
Although I do own a few, but those are for emergencies. If you had to go out and get all of the firewood to cook with and to light up your house with a hearth, if you had to go out and chop down all the pine to make some pine torches or collect oil to make oil lamps and then make the pottery for the oil lamps, you would be very much more conscious of the lighting that you use. Lighting was very expensive in the past.
Well, just your luck, Nancy. We have this news piece that came through this month. Actually, the article came through on a feed, but it was from 2020 paper. But I held on to it because I'm curious about this. This was a very interesting piece that was from Astrobytes, Whitening the Sky, Light Pollution as a Form of Cultural Genocide. The thesis is that our modern outdoor lighting technologies are whitewashing cultural traditions and systems of knowledge by eliminating the community's connection to the night sky. It's said that the Aboriginal Australians use constellations to identify planting seasons. Such peoples also observe the brightness variability of the orange star that demarks the shoulder of Orion, Betelgeuse. The star is technically a semi-regular variable star at 400 days. In addition, Betelgeuse Aboriginal Australians also identified the variability in the bright red star in Taurus, Aldebaran, and and also the red star Antares in Scorpius. So what I've read, and I like reading this stuff. I think I saw one of your books out on Amazon, so it may be coming my way.
I can send it to you.
That works even better. I'm a big fan. The night sky seems to act like a fusion between spirituality and an ancient equivalent to kind of television, whereby it was a canvas for humans to paint on everything from their imagination. And it feels like the more we dissociate ourselves with nature, and the night sky in particular, the less outward looking we appear, and the more inward our cultural norms tend to become. So it seems like there's a trend to even greater self-importance and self-aggrandizement within our species, the more we separate ourselves from what, say, 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, the Mayan civilization would have cherished as part of its 24-hour day cycle. Is that accurate or is that an inaccurate assumption?
I don't know if I would liken the night sky to the television, but the article to which you refer by Dwayne Hummaker is from this book. And I don't know if you're familiar with The First Astronomers, How Indigenous Elders Read the Stars. He and Indigenous elders talk about the influence of the night sky on their daily life, what happens during the day. So night is not just a time for doing different things or using different objects. It's a time for reflection and tying in what's happening in the sky to what's happening on Earth. And we in the West tend to compartmentalize night, day, Earth, sky. But for many people, it's not that way. There's a great website, Native Sky Watchers. And if you go there, there are all kinds of examples of how the night is connected to the day, how looking at the stars or viewing certain stars or planets inform you about perhaps what you should be doing in terms of planting or fishing or whatever. These are natural cycles. And this is something David knows far more about than I in terms of the night sky and different celestial phenomena.
Yeah, I want to bounce that over to David. Early civilizations being able to understand the variation in individual star brightness is, quite frankly, a pretty amazing concept to me.
It is, but it was very, very familiar to them, and not just Aboriginals, but all the cultures, and for many thousands of years, knew the sky very well. And when the springtime constellations appeared early in the evening after darkness, it was time to plant again. So this was an annual calendar, and not only the practical living decisions that had to be made for groups, from hunter-gatherers all the way back to the dawn of human species, if you will, up to the time of the earliest cities, Catalhoyuk and others, 10, 12,000 years ago and a little more than that, based their routines on the night sky. And when they had to do various things, and this is precisely shown by alignments in countless Neolithic structures, Stonehenge right on down the line, being and Newgrange and the pyramids and everything being aligned celestially with various stars for important timekeeping and date keeping and cultural and ritualistic traditions, including burying important people in them and all that kind of stuff, to, from a slight connection there all the way to ancient Egypt where, you were assuring that the pharaoh would travel into the afterlife in a certain way. So everything up until several hundred years ago was intimately connected with what was happening in the sky when it was visible and very known to everyone.
I just want to add something to what David is saying there. My grandfather was in the Canadian Air Force, and his job was to fly planes built in the United States that crossed the border, and he would fly them over to Britain. He did that using the stars. So he would navigate these planes from Montreal or Toronto or in between over to Britain by the stars. We're only a generation away from when navigation by the stars by us Europeans was commonly taught to us, and how to see them. And he had books and all these different instruments that he would use. And he was a corporal or whatever. He wasn't an officer. This was a trade. He was like he was an airman in the Canadian Army. He wasn't an officer, and this was his job. Can I ask Dr. Gonlin a quick question, Bill, if that's okay? I'm very fascinated with what she was talking about. You'd mentioned that the sky, I think the fire was the TV. And I think that our species consumed firelight in the same way we consume TV now, except the entertainment was each other rather than what was on the screen. Dr. Gonlin, in your path through this anthropology, archaeology of the night, have you discovered any relationships between human evolution or civilization? I don't know what the right description of what I'm talking about is, and our relationship to fire and attraction to the hearth and our wanting to come together around that at night. Have you discovered any of that kind of stuff on the journey?
Yeah, definitely. If you think of the hearth as where people would gather around and tell stories at night and relax, there is one anthropologist, Polly Wiesner, who studied day talk versus night talk for the Juthuansi, who are commonly known as the Bushmen. And she found that there was a marked difference in day talk, which is more business. Night talk has more to do with spiritual things and connecting with people. And if you think of how the TV replaced that hearth, then that is the analogy to the TV that Bill was trying to get at. And then today, of course, it's gone even further where you don't even have to share a TV with your family. You can just have all your individual iPads or cells or whatever. So we've really moved away from that. Am I answering your question, Michael?
Yes. I think our relationship to fire is one of these things that's assumed in the whole basket of confusion about a light at night and what it's for.
Yeah, there's a book called Fire and How It Made Us Human. There's also a book by another anthropologist. I'm drawing a blank at their names at the moment, but they will come to me, on how cooking made us human, and that relates to our control of fire. And it's debatable whether humans used or controlled fire as far back as 500,000 years ago before we were fully Homo sapiens, or does it go back even further, like 1.8 million years ago to Homo erectus? And it's hard to get evidence for the first fire. How do you know you have the first evidence, for example? You don't. You don't ever know that you have the first of something. It's hard to say. But I would be willing to say that Homo erectus probably could control fire just based on the brain size of at least 1,000 cubic centimeters. Modern humans have an average of about 1,500. And we can do all kinds of things, and Homo erectus certainly had the ability to spread throughout the world from an African homeland during ice ages into Europe and into Asia. Obviously, there had to be some kind of fire going on here because of the geological time period here of the Earth. So fire is part of our evolution in terms of our accomplishments and how it has affected us. The person who wrote about the cooking and how that made us human, he's a Harvard biological anthropologist, and Richard Wrangham, that's who he is, and how if you think about what cooked food did to our anatomy in terms of survival. Not only does fire kill pathogens, but it can also make food more palatable for those who need to eat softened food, like babies or people who have lost their teeth. And this affected, in turn, our jaw size. This is his reasoning, of course. And that on down the line in terms of the stimulation to our brain and other things. So fire is very much a part of what it means to be human. Use fire today. I have my biological anthropology students do an exercise on looking at early evidence for fire and then how we continue to use fire, because it's part of our daily life. We might not think that it is, but it is.
That's a very good point on fire. Do you guys all have TVs, just out of curiosity?
Mm-hmm. More than one.
Yeah, okay. I think I'm the only one here without TV. I gave up the TV maybe 10 years ago, and I don't think I've looked back. Still catch events, but what you do is you find places to catch the events, or it's more of a common thing.
I'll give you an anecdote like that, though.
Yeah.
Just as a little aside. So my house, the heating system, it's built to use fire. So I burn 3 bush cords of wood every winter up here in Ontario. It gets very cold, as you guys know. And I heat my home. About 60% of the heat in my home comes from fire. And I'll tell you this, during the day, people are not interested in fire. If there's a fire in the fireplace or whatever, they're not interested in it. But at night, everybody gathers around the fire in my home. Everybody. It's magnetic. If you're a visitor in my house and you're there and it's 5 o'clock and it's dark and the fire is going, you want to go sit beside the fire. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I mean, it still has that same draw. We just don't have very much of it in our lives anymore.
If you think of modern houses, they're built with fireplaces. Why is that? Some of them are electronic fireplaces, but we have one. Why do we have that? From an architectural viewpoint. Yeah. Do you have a fireplace in your house, Bill, if I may ask?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you use that instead of like the TV?
No. But
just curious.
Yeah. It can't handle fire, so we don't use it as a fireplace because But as such, I definitely understand that what you're talking about, Mike, because it happens when you have a campfire, for instance. First thing you want to do when you go camping is to get the fire going. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter what time of day when you're camping. You just want to get the fire going.
But I believe humans are naturally drawn to it. There's some at night they want to be close to it, and it's an instinct. I don't think it's a choice. I don't think, oh, that's a nice fire, I'm going to go sit beside it. I think they're just drawn into it. There's something about it that draws us in.
Yeah. Well, let's switch over to some health news. Researchers from Yale University identified a correlation between exposure to small particle air pollution and generalized light pollution with pediatric thyroid cancer. Researchers looked at 736 cases of thyroid cancer between the 19-year span of 1982 through 2011. They utilized modeling to obtain an air pollution projection and also utilized New World Atlas of artificial night sky brightness. According to the study, for every 10 micrograms per cubic meter increase in fine particulate, the overall risk of cancer appeared to rise by 7%. With regards to generalized exterior light pollution, individuals residing in areas with a medium-high exterior artificial light score incurred 23 to 25% higher odds of thyroid cancer than those in low-exposure settings. Every 1 millicandela per square meter increase in light pollution appeared to raise the risk by a similar 7%. This latter light pollution association was not seen in children under 14. We also had the Journal of Prevention Intervention in the Community. Researchers identified an association between generalized light pollution via the VIIRS dataset and Gonlin propensity for higher systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, and increased odds of hypertension. And then there was a study in neurology that looked to see if generalized light pollution had any impact on individuals with pervasive development disorders that also had either sleep disorders or were prescribed sleep medication. The team found a low significance with regards to light pollution's effect, opting for more correlative variables. And to close out health news, maybe really all we need is a fire and a day or two to unwind from our day-to-day stresses. Here's a fun article. I'm not sure how much you can glean from the study with a population of 5, but have at it. The International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, a team of 3, looked at how differing levels of night sky brightness affected individuals' ability to feel mentally refreshed. To do this, they said they took 5 women and put them into a planetarium where they experienced a cascading level of night sky darkness from city to a perfect dark night sky. The team measured brain activity, heart rate, and the psychological feeling of the individuals, with the latter being a survey rating scale. It was found that the more natural the night, the more healed the individuals felt. Now, I know that was a very limited experiment. However, David, I'm sure you've heard these stories through being the editor of astronomy. I mean, I'm sure you get letters to the editor all the time, and this is probably a chunk that you would say falls into a category.
I think so. And it's such early day. That's such a complicated thing. And it's such early days trying to understand psychologically what happens with people. And people are so different individual to individual. It's really hard to draw conclusions from something like that. But just from a commonsensical standpoint, just like we're drawn to the fire when the fire was the source, when, long ago when we were in groups that hung together to survive, the fire was protection from predators at night. It was cooking the food that we discovered several 100,000 years ago, that people who cooked food lived longer. They didn't drop dead so quickly. That was important because of bacteria and so on, but parasites. But I think here it's so hard to tell, but just the gut reaction from me, from what I've heard from people, from talking to enthusiasts over the years, the darker, quieter night you have to really rest and get into that good cycle of REM sleep and refresh yourself away from sky brightness and things going on. And I'm, guilty of this as anyone. Sometimes I'll fall asleep with an earpiece in there listening to comedy or something just to, relax. Well, I think, you take that stimulation away, which includes sky brightness. You're going to be more relaxed and refreshed because you weren't supposed to live through that every night. I don't know. That's just a supposition, but maybe we don't remove enough of those stimuli that we get throughout the whole night in some way as well. And we weren't designed for that. I don't know. It's just a supposition.
David, we moved a couple of years back, and we went from being on the street with a lot of neighbor lights to kind of having a little corner where you don't get lights affecting the bedroom. And it was totally different. And that's anecdotal, just me. Maybe I'm, having a bias here, but I can definitely say it's totally different. Nighttime is a different experience when you don't have neighbors shining lights directly into your bedroom.
I think there's something to that. And we're conditioned, now in this society, we want to achieve stuff all the time. We want to work on stuff. We want to be, not wasting time. I don't think we give ourselves what we're supposed to have, that renewal period in which we can sleep. There's an old George Carlin routine, where, if aliens came down and saw that, periodically and in regular intervals, if everyone went and laid down on a platform and didn't move, for 8 hours, you'd think that this was a society of psychotics, what's going on here. But now we know, of course, our brain, gets a wash from cerebrospinal fluid. There are repairs, there's memory storage, there's maintenance that goes on, and it helps us to live longer, our life expectancy. So, I think there's real value in that dark sky and that peaceful night, and not having the way things have evolved here with such an active society, all the light everywhere, that takes that relaxation and restoration away from us. We just don't know absolutely for sure, but I think there's something to that.
Yeah, Bill, one of the articles that we have not talked about was the PNAS nexus on deciduous trees and how artificial light affects them at night. Well, if deciduous trees are affected by artificial light at night, why wouldn't we be?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I mean, there's so many, Nancy, to your point, ecology is so thick with how artificial light affects ecology. We have a tab on our website that just looks at 2024 recap of the ecology news. And if it affects other mammals, why will we be excluded from that? And to your point, it's the tree article for you at home is in the show notes. We didn't get to it, ran out of time. David, when you're saying, you think that there's something to this, who else thinks that there's something to this? Is the International Astronomical Union.
Generally speaking, unless they're reclassifying Pluto as a dwarf planet, they know what they're doing. Okay. Just saying. Okay.
You still have a holding grudge about that, huh?
I knew Clyde Tombaugh. I had to get that joke in there. Okay.
Well, were you aware that they have this astronomy for mental health, I guess, working group? Yes, absolutely. And they have many groups and they're very good people. And these are true empirical scientists. The conclusions that they reach are well supported. IAU members, so they are experimental and observational scientists. So I think there's something to that and to their work on that. Yes, indeed. Yeah, the workshop helps utilize astronomy and recognizes the night sky for benefit of positive mental health. You'll recall about a year or so ago, we were showcasing an article from a veterans hospital out in Pittsburgh that was installing an observatory to help veterans overcome trauma. And veterans typically have the most trauma, or at least the most PTSD in the evening hours. And much of the idea was the same, and it gave them kind of a purpose in the evening hours was to do actual physical astronomy in that facility, which is another example of how our relationship with night, relationship with darkness actually impacts our mental, at least I think it impacts our mental health. Years ago, we lost him a long time ago, but Carl Sagan helped me get going early in my career. He was a great guy, and he used to say that, 1/10 of 1% of the people, on Earth realize their place in the cosmos. Almost everyone is born, lives, and dies without understanding where they are in the scheme of things, And I think there is some value there. You see people at star parties with a sidewalk telescope looking, little simple 6-inch reflector, and they look in and can see Saturn with its, orangey disk and rings or all sorts of other objects. To most people, it never occurs to them that they can go out and look at this stuff, and they're part of a very big system, that we're orbiting one star among something on the order of several hundred billion in the Milky Way. There are at least 100 billion galaxies out there in the cosmos. I think that perspective of how enormous the universe is and how special it is to be alive. We're not made symbolically of atoms that it previously existed in the universe. The very lightest atoms in our bodies, hydrogen, helium, and lithium mostly, and all the astronomers call all the heavier ones metals. All of the light stuff was produced in Big Bang nucleosynthesis in the early days of the universe. The heavier stuff all were produced, those atoms that make up our bodies, that compose us and enable us to be thinking, sentient beings talking to each other about what all this means, were created in the deaths of low and medium and sometimes high mass stars. So we are made of recombined atoms, something on the order of 7 octillion, that's 7 billion atoms. Some of us are larger than other people, I'm afraid, but should jog around the block more, instead of writing books. But we are literally made of atoms that were created in stars. That's pretty incredible stuff. And when people see that, and understand how large the universe is and what their place is in it, I think there's more respect for understanding the sky and for lighting and being able to see it all and experience it. It's nice to see that light bulb, no pun intended, go off in someone's mind when they look at whether it be Saturn or the Andromeda Galaxy or whatever. When we were speaking before, right? The less association we have with our night, we feel more superior, we feel more invulnerable, and we seem to be more just focused on ourselves. It seems to be the path we take. Yeah.
It's not a surprise that the light pollution movement started with astronomers because they were impacted by it right away. But what we've come to see, that the study that you mentioned there is pre-LED, the one that was 2011. So that was before the adoption of LED technology. Dr. Mario Amata, he won't say this, but I'm going to say it for him, that electric light at night is carcinogenic. And Dr. Amardeep Dugar, who I had on my show, and I think he'd be a great guest for your show as well, Bill. He's insisting now that all of the circadian lighting, so circadian effective lighting is I don't want to say nonsense. I'm sure there's some work we can do to improve interior lighting that can impact circadian rhythms, but all the benefits come from darkness. All of them. Like all of this sleeping properly is when your body is healing. It's when it's getting rid of cancer. It's all these different angles coming at this issue are showing that not only does it block out the stars for the astronomers, but it's making you sick, for lots of different reasons. And so you need that sleep. You need that darkness that you have in your room. And, I don't know how we get past it, but it's moving from astronomers now all the way down to environmentalists and cancer researchers and all this. But we have to remember it started, I think the early 90s, you mentioned the fellow's name that started the idea. It's not a surprise. But the other people now that can do more about it have to take that baton from them and move forward.
Excellent point. Well said. Mike, I have some good lighting news. You've been paying attention to this Northwestern University, Ryan Field?
I don't think I've encountered him yet, no.
Yeah, so Northwestern currently plays football at Ryan Field, but they're rebuilding it as a new stadium. And the stadium has some rather interesting features. It'll be pretty small by D1 standards for college football here in the U.S. standard. We're talking about American football. 35,000 seats, which is pretty small by D1. Usually there's 60,000 or upwards from there. It also has a very green-forward design. In addition to large swaths of open space outside of the actual stadium, the design the team unveiled has a canopy cover in the stadium, capturing much of the harmful uplighting that we see in professional sporting events. In addition, the stadium won't directly illuminate its signage. Rather, it's utilizing halo lighting of 3,000 to 4,000 Kelvin LED lights to add an effective glow around the lettering, and then further lighting plans to harness the ambient internal stadium lighting rather than projecting exterior lights of the field. Could Ryan Field be a model for responsible stadium design?
No, it's a step in the right direction, though. I think that, just because we don't know exactly what to do as a lighting industry doesn't mean we can't get out in the field, start shielding things, start covering stadiums at night so the light doesn't blast off into the universe forever. I think there's all sorts of things we should do, and I would encourage lighting practitioners to push and push and push in this area and consider themselves both lighting and darkness designers. That darkness is something that we design for as well. And so my hat's off to the stadium for being a leader. But I think this idea that we're going to come up with the answer and that's going to be it is it's a very American way of thinking, actually. With the entrepreneurial spirit of America, I'm going to solve the problem and I'm going to sell it to everybody. That's how we got in this mess with LEDs in the first place. The whole 2010, let's move fast and break stuff. This isn't Facebook. This is our critical infrastructure we're talking about.
Michael, I don't know if you've been paying attention to the news. The rest of this country, our government has adopted that plan as well.
Hey, listen, I don't want to get into I'm a Canadian, so I don't want to get into the U.S. politics. It's like you try to wade in, you don't even know
what we do. We move fast and break everything. It's done at the government level and it's done now. It's done.
That's Silicon Valley. Sorry, go ahead.
Americans don't want to get into American politics, right?
Yeah. I don't even know how to answer.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know how to.
I'm not saying anything.
I don't know where the doorway.
I didn't mean to put anyone out in a
I don't know where the door, the safe path through that is. But I think America does a lot of things amazing, and I think Americans don't realize that because they're in America and they don't realize how dynamic America's economy is and how well people work together to build things and create things in America. But we had this temptation after Facebook and Uber that everything could just be blown up and recreated and it would be way better than it was before. And so in the lighting industry, I called them Johnny come lately and the lighting marauders. People that were swinging through the trees with knives in their teeth and dropping in and I know everything about lighting now and these people don't know anything. And there was a real lack of credentialism. I think that's true now in our society in Canada and the United States is a lack of respect for credentials for people that have a history of understanding things like economics, for example. I don't want to go into anything, but
Michael, it's across the board in every discipline. I think you're seeing it. Yeah.
I'm a podcaster, but I'm in the lighting industry and I bring my perspective, but I have respect for people's credentials and what they're trying to do. And I think, with this stadium and with things like this, we have to have a mindset that this is going to take time to figure out. That doesn't mean we don't want street lighting. It doesn't mean they shouldn't build the stadium, but we need to get that darkness piece into the minds of architects, designers, engineers, lighting specifiers, these kinds of people. And I think if Northwestern has done that, they should win an award, and the next people should try to beat them, and the next people should try to beat them, and not rest on any laurels, and not rest back and say we've got it figured out, because we haven't. But we need to keep moving forward in this direction. That would be my assessment of what's happening there.
There are many architects doing that. I just finished this book called A Nocturnal History of Architecture. It's almost entirely written by Europeans, I have to say.
Europeans are a bit judgy. Like, I'm Canadian, so I'm halfway in between. Like, there's lots of things that Europe does really, really well. One of them is regulations. Europe is wonderful at creating regulations. And then the way they do it people make fun of the EU, and it's a big sweat, but all of them, listen, the US Congress is a big swaying body of crazy making. Okay. This is how these things work in democracies. And so the EU has been a wonderful leader with all kinds of great regulations. And one of those areas is in light pollution abatement and dark skies or darkness restoration, whatever term you want to use. They're leading there. We could lead there. We could do better in Canada and the United States. For sure we could, but some of the priorities of our institutions is to protect their people that give money to them. And this is a huge problem in the United States. It's not as big a problem in Canada, but it's a huge problem in the United States that there's so much money sloshing around between these nonprofit groups that it kind of corrupts their mission not that people are corrupted. I'm not saying there's corruption. Like, people are like scheming, like this, but it does influence the way we think about things. If those people are always at the table and they're always influencing the decision and they're part of the revenue of the whole thing and their influence is very high, we have to be careful. Our institutions are very precious. We need to protect them. And so, the lighting industry institutions have kind of, in North America, Canada, United States, have kind of have not come onto this as fast as they could have, as the Europeans did, simply because of that pressure from stakeholder groups, or what you would call lobbyists, or whatever, the military industrial. I call it the lighting industry deep state. That's what I call it as a joke on my show. I call it the lighting industry deep state, but it's out there and it's real, and they have powerful effects on things. And many of them are in Washington. Many of them are influencing legislation. And it's not the right thing to be. It's not what that particular institution should be doing, for example. It should be another institution, and they should get out of the way. And so we see a lot of this. Europeans are better at regulations than us. Let's take them and bring them in here. Why do we have to waste time learning if they're working on it? It's not a competition. This is academia, right, Dr. Gonlin? Isn't that how it's supposed to work?
Yeah.
Gonlin story.
That's okay. Two people in particular, Nick Dunn and Tim Edensor in England, have led the charge. And there's actually an international conference on night studies, and that comes out of the University of Portugal. The founder, Dr. Manuel Ruiz Garcia, is a sociologist there. And I was sitting on their scientific board for the first 5 years of that conference. And this involves all kinds of experts in lighting, for example, architecture, the arts, anthropology, sociology, history, geography, just every imaginable field of study. So I have participated in that and learned a lot from this. And I have to thank all of you on this show today for giving me even more incredible resources and broadening my horizons. And as an educator, what I do to make people aware of the night and its disappearing darkness is every single student of mine now knows about the fact that disappearing dark nights is a problem that we need to solve, and it can be resolved actually easier than some other types of pollution. And I'm aware that, as all of you have said, that light pollution is pollution, that many people don't consider it to be pollution, but it really is. So as an educator, I assign to every single one of my classes an assignment on the night, and they have to bring it forward into the present. It's not just about the past or biological anthropology, but they need to connect it with your own nocturnal footprint and how you can reduce that. So this is some really great resources here that I've gotten today so that I can broaden my own assignments for my students. So thank you for that.
Can I throw one thing on the table, Bill, that might upset you? But it came at me, and it was wonderful. And Dr. Amardeep Dugar, he said that light pollution is the wrong word. It's actually darkness pollution. Because when we have air pollution, it's not the methyl mercury that's polluted. It's the air being polluted by the methyl mercury, right? And it's not the light that's polluted. It's the darkness that's polluted. And so we come at this with so many wrong terminology that it's hard for people to understand that light pollution is pollution. And I know the name of your show is Light Pollution News. And another one, unfortunately, is dark skies. Dark skies is not really a descriptive term. It doesn't translate well into other languages. It means foreboding in our lexicon. When you say there's dark skies ahead, it's bad. So some of the terms that we use to describe this, I'm trying to push, David, the term dark skies into as an astronomical term. That's how astronomy describes what they're after, but what we want is night preservation and darkness restoration.
Absolutely.
And so, so just the terminology, I think, can be helpful too if we could square that circle.
Yeah, there's definitely a linguistic element to all of this.
Yeah, it can be. I usually use starry skies because I think you're onto something with dark pollution.
Dr. Amardeep Dugar wasn't me. It's him. We just want to be clear that he brought that to us.
I think darkness is a scary term. So if you say dark pollution, it might actually hold up a little better because light is something how can something that's beneficial be a pollutant, right? But, you can say that with water pollution. I don't know. We can go down the lexicon either way.
The water is actually polluted by some other foreign element that shouldn't be there. And in this case, it's the light that shouldn't be there. Right. And so our whole mindset has to change and how we speak about I don't know if it has to, but if it did, it might help people understand better.
Yeah, it's a good point. I know I don't use certain terminologies in the city. Just, it's not going to connect. Well, this is a good lead in for something, David. I want to ask you this. There's in Champaign County, Illinois, there's a new trail that came online in the Middle Fork River Forest Preserve's Illinois' only International Dark Sky Park. I know it should be a different term, but International Dark Sky Park is a dark sky trail that spans a mile with open views of the night sky. In your 43 years in astronomy, kind of paying attention to this world, it used to be something that people could do in their home, like in their yard and in their neighborhood. And now, I know myself, I know many people, we have to drive 4 or 5 hours to get to a spot where you can just see the Milky Way. How have you seen that change your readership's behavior? Like, instead of just being at home, now they got to buy the camper van and they got to go and, drive somewhere to do something that it's a much more difficult hobby, or is it not?
It is a much more difficult hobby in that sense now. And there are a lot of dark sky parks out there, like the one you mentioned in Champaign, but they're really small areas, and they're isolated. And really to do astronomy, it took me 43 years to move to Tucson. For most people, I can walk out now and I've got a really dark sky straight out of the, front door before I dark adapt at all even. That's very unusual now, of course, in the United States. Most people don't have access to a dark sky at all, as you say, without a significant trip. That means it's got to be a planned thing. It has to be a big deal to them. They have to put a telescope for many, many people in a car. It also then influences the kind of telescope they can take with them, and there's a little bit of sort of a backwash to that, if you will, in the sense that it's gotten to be much, much easier as technology has improved to capture images of the sky with a telescope, even in relatively light polluted areas or dark polluted areas, however we want to start calling it. So, you can do imaging even in not very great sites, but people who love astronomy, they want to go out and see the Milky Way naked eye and do observing and stuff like that. So it is frustrating for a lot of people in a lot of areas now. And it's also something that, everyone who's my son's age, my son is 32 now, people who are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, they're doing a lot of astronomy online, and once in a while owls, they go, and not my son, I'm just using his age, he's into other stuff. But they're doing a lot of stuff online with astronomy activity. It hasn't necessarily killed the enthusiasm for the subject, but they don't go out and as easily do it. I grew up in near a small town in Ohio called Oxford there. My father was a professor at Miami University there. You could go out into the backyard in back of a farm field there, and you had a dark sky right there, And even that same site has changed dramatically in 40 years. It's much worse now than it was 40 years ago even. That's part of one's lifetime. So it's really hard for a lot of people to go out and experience the universe, even compared to a few decades ago. And it's a conundrum now. There's no easy solution for it. So I think it's something in the United States, fewer and fewer and fewer people are going to have that experience until we do implement some kind of improvement with the photons that are bouncing all over the place at night, every night.
Yes. Yeah, David, I get the sense there's a paradox. Back in 50 years ago, people would go outside, or at least some people would be crazy enough to go outside and stargaze, and you didn't have to worry about as much light coming at you. And nowadays, everyone maximizes the light outside, locks the doors, closes the blinds, and we never go outside anymore at night.
Yeah. And I like to think of, I don't know if you've ever, it's maybe before your guys' time now too, but Seinfeld, the comedy, there was a famous nut, who was a boyfriend of Elaine's, and she sort of sheepishly comes in and doesn't realize this guy's crazy. And your door was unlocked and the lights are off. And he says, well, I like to encourage intruders, and I think that's kind of the, that kind of immortality, that's kind of what we need now to, whether you're wandering out in there, or there's a bobcat in your yard, or you're worried about someone lurking around in a city or something. Some of that kind of fearlessness, a lot of the amateur astronomers have adopted now. Yeah. And it's kind of sad that we have to get to that, or that people do have to drive an hour or two or more.
4.5 hours. Yeah.
To observe in that's, then eventually, if this progression continues on for another century or two, then eventually no one will know or care about the universe or observing it, I would think.
I think, David, there's another step after that, too. Yeah. It's not just that they don't have access to astronomy. Yeah. They don't have access to the night, period. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and all of the benefits that come from nighttime. And along with all of the living things we live with around us. Yes. Are losing access to night, period, not just
absolutely.
astronomy.
And I shouldn't diminish. I mean, the effect on all other living things is just as significant as it, I'm not trying to forget about everything else, but us, elitist humans either. And I mean, this is happening in professional astronomy too. Now, partly because as the astronomer Bart Bach, another old guy, has been gone for a long, long time, but a great expert on the Milky Way galaxy, used to like to say, all the good stuff's in the southern hemisphere. Well, now part of it is that, but part of it is that there are relatively few absolutely perfectly dark sites left that are at high elevation on Earth. One of them is the Atacama Desert in Chile, which, of course, the southern hemisphere has a lot of good stuff in it that the northern hemisphere doesn't as far as objects. So most of the really good, very large telescopes now, the ones whose funding is not suddenly in jeopardy. No comment, on that. But
move fast and break things, David. Move fast and break things.
Right. The big telescope projects mostly are being built, in the Atacama Desert in Chile now. Professional astronomers, even though there are, 8 major observatories you could drive from my house here, to in this region here, Kitt Peak being the closest. But most professional astronomers are giving up on the United States or Hawaii even, or the Canary Islands even, and going to Chile now because of the trends in light pollution or dark pollution.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's close this out. I think I've held you guys here long enough. Let me close out this show with this. It's a reflection. It comes to us by the way of Los Angeles Times. an opinion piece by Gilla Lyons. Can the stars at night be our own paused moment of Zen? Perhaps that's why so many folks are drawn to the dazzling pinpricks of light, as Lyons puts it. For Lyons, the night sky has never been the main story in her life. It's been a common binding force. First in her youth, backpacking across Death Valley's pristine nights in a sky so free from moisture and light pollution that there was no black. Then now as a mother of a young child, whereby simple excursions to roll out the trash can to the curb at night provides glimpses of significantly dimmer sky, but a reprieve nonetheless. For Lyons, asterisms such as Orion's sword and a parade of planets like Venus point to a timeless human ritual of looking up, passed down through millennia, for which, like those before her, she now extends the experience to her toddler. I will leave you this as written by Lyons. When we decided to leave the city for the suburbs last year, we gave up so much. But we were ready for more space, more quiet, and one of the big motivators for me was to live in a place with some access to the night sky. We will miss our friends, the familiar, too crowded, too narrow streets, and all the events and activities we were part of there. But I felt the lack of darkness and astronomic context acutely. It's my dream to take my husband and son to one of the few dark places we have left in this country, to experience the night sky as I've known it to be. But even this view from our driveway now comforts me deeply, offering glimpses of the people I used to be, of the transcendent amid the laundry of the universe every trash night. So there we have for June. I want to say for those of you who are attending the Astronomical League convention and stargazing at Bryce Canyon, I wish I could be there. I wish all of you the best and safe travels. David, you're attending that, right?
I have been to many, many league conventions. I actually won't be there this year because I'm going to be at the Grand Canyon Star Party in Arizona close to the same time this year. But I will be back at the league convention many times in the future.
Tough trying to pick out which perfect sky to go to, huh?
Indeed. Yeah. Bryce Canyon is a really dark, incredibly nice place to observe. It is. I've been there with the league, in fact, before.
I was there 2010, 2011. When was it?
Somewhere in the air. I forget now. Yeah,
that was a great time. That was a good time. How can folks learn more about what you do, David?
They can go to astronomy.com, which is easy to remember, and it's our brand's website, and you can find everything you need to know about the cosmos right there.
I'd also like to thank Dr. Nancy Gonlin for some incredible insights today, professor at Bellevue College out in Washington, the same town of her hometown here in Pennsylvania. Nancy, if folks would like to reach out to you, how can they best reach you?
Use my college email, which is nan.gonlin@bellevuecollege.edu. That's the best place. Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. I learned so much from all of you, and I really, really enjoyed this. This was fun.
Glad you could come. And finally, we have, last but not least, I'd like to thank fellow podcaster and entrepreneur, Michael Colligan. Michael, it was the best way for folks to connect with you.
I think the best way for this audience here is to go to restoringdarkness.com and all the social media related to it. If you just Google Restoring Darkness Podcast, it'll come up right away. And you can contact, you want to be a guest, if you want to support the work in any way, share it around in the same way that Bill needs your support to get this podcast thing moving. And I thank you, Bill, for doing what you do. Your perspective is valuable. And I finish with stargazing is my psychedelic drug. Everybody talks about how popular psychedelic drugs are, but I'll tell you, stargazing in the right kind of night, if you've never seen it before, it's up there in one of those kinds of experiences, including seeing the Northern Lights. That's another really wonderful experience as well. That'll blow your mind. So I encourage people, like David said, to connect with the night. And one of the best ways to do that is to see the cosmos and our celestial heritage.
And make sure you have the Theobroma chocolate mix.
Absolutely.
That really, really transcends. It makes the Northern Lights kind of jump out at you, I think.
Milk chocolate,
I think Nancy and I could have a glass of wine.
Red wine goes very well with chocolate.
For sure.
I want to thank you, the listener, for joining us today. As a reminder, Light Pollution News is a listener-supported show, which means that we take no outside advertising and solely rely on the support of you, the listener. If you like what we do, why not consider helping us this year and continue pushing forward our mission of keeping you, the listener, informed. If you heard anything on the show that makes you Want to shoot over a comment or question, feel free to text us via the text link in the show notes or send an email to bill@lightpollutionnews.com. You can find us online, lightpollutionnews.com, on the socials, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, Facebook, and more. Today's show is recorded on May 18th, 2025. I'm your host, Bill McGeaney, thanking you again for listening today. Remember to only shine the light where it's needed.